Having a child is like having a piece of your heart exist outside of your body. Have you heard that phrase before? That feels true. When I travel away from my sons, or really any time we are apart, I do not feel quite whole. Will that feeling ever go away? Would I ever want it to? I was brought to the brink of parental vulnerability way back in April of 2020. It was the beginning of the pandemic, and a UU minister, a dear colleague of mine, Kim, mother to 2 little boys, age 4 and 2, took her youngest 2-year-old son, Malcolm, to the hospital for a spiking fever. And just 2 days later, she did not return home with him. It all happened so fast. In fact, the cause of his death was listed as something called sudden unexplained death syndrome. Losing a little child so suddenly and with no real explanation was just unimaginable to me. I could not fathom continuing to parent, to love, to stay married, to minister. All this at the first crest of the pandemic, when a funeral could not be held, people could neither hug nor travel. How to move forward with life? How? Yet, this is exactly what Kim and her family have done. A week after her little boy's death, the family sat on their front lawn as their entire community drove by, waving, giving flowers and other gifts, blowing kisses, and sharing in their grief. It was so public. They put it on Facebook Live. I watched the procession. Kim, her wife, and older son received the cavalcade for hours. A month or so later, some members of Kim's congregation came over to their front yard and planted a garden for Malcolm so that his older brother could have a place to sit and remember him. And as the months pass by, Kim posts photos of Malcolm's garden, and I recently noticed a butterfly bush. I imagine the family sitting amongst the ghost wings, feeling the lightest touch, a tickle on the arm, like the flutter of a baby's heart. A couple of months later, Kim returned to ministry, to pastoring, integrating this loss into her sermons, her pastoral care, and her stewardship of this community where the congregation had meanwhile deepened its own pastoral skills and their own and communal support. The loss of her young son, Malcolm, is never far from her thoughts. In her ministry, the veil between living and dead remains thin, and it has blessed her congregation, and it has blessed me. She was honored and delighted that I wanted to share her, Malcolm, and their family's story with you today. And then, impossibly, 5 months ago, 1 year after Malcolm's death, Kim's wife gave birth to their 3rd little baby boy. Can you imagine? How complicated, how stunningly resilient, how achingly beautiful. I sit in wonder. How do they do it? How do any of us keep going after loss? The losses of this pandemic, they have been especially brutal. Deaths that could not properly be mourned. End-of-life moments where our sick and our dying loved ones must be alone due to hospital COVID restrictions. This is the worst part, not only to die, but to die without loved ones present. We are still, all of us, living through a mass death event. Everything we do remains in the shadow of that reality. On my or my children's worst days, I try to remember that and offer us all a little extra grace and comfort. And we have suffered loss other than death. Some of us, over the last year and a half, have lost precious years of fertility where we might have been more aggressive in getting pregnant or finding a partner. Many of us have had to endure pandemic-enforced estrangement from our children or our grandchildren as we anxiously worry and wonder how much time we have left in our aging bodies and minds to enjoy them. Some of us have delayed weddings or important life celebrations. Some have missed senior high graduation or prom. Some of us have lost our jobs or had to let them go to care for family. And some of us have lost our health and vitality without the support of our daily interactions and community. And these ambiguous losses, they are difficult to name and even more difficult to grieve. We know now that grief, it's not a linear process moving cleanly from sad to resolved. In a conversation with Krista Tippett, the psychologist Pauline Boss, who coined the term ambiguous loss, reframes our society's understanding of the grieving process. She writes, to the extent that we have a cultural vocabulary of grief, it was very much formed by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and her delineated 5 stages of grief in 1969. That's denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. But in fact, she never meant for those stages of grief to be taken on the way we've taken them on, which is that when we encounter any grieving person or any person's loss, even the more traditional forms of loss, we think that's kind of a prescription for what they go through. And then they get to the end, acceptance. This is part of our culture of mastery, a culture of problem solving and wanting to move on with things, Boss writes. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, in fact, found those 5 stages to be relevant to people who are dying, who are fading into death, not someone who's at the loss end of that death. She did not mean it for the family members, and it has blurred over into that. Maybe it was her, maybe it was more her followers, but today, the new research in grief and loss does not recommend linear stages. We like linear stages, though. There's a finite end. Acceptance. You're done. If you start with stage 1, you just move on to stage 5, and then it's over. You're no longer grieving. Well, we know that this is not true, and that human beings live with grief and, in fact, are able to live with grief. They don't have to get over it. They don't obsess over it 5 years down the road, but they occasionally remember and are sad, or go to the grave and think about that person who died. And this is normal. So we know now that living with grief is more oscillations of up and down. Those ups and downs get farther apart over time, but they never completely go away. Not those downs, those times of feeling blue and sad. In order to understand this, though, we do need to make a difference between depression and sadness, Boss says. Depression is an illness that requires a medical intervention. It is the minority of people who have depression. Sadness is something else. Sadness is the feeling that comes with watching your loved one suffer with Alzheimer's or losing your best friend to cancer. And sadness must be treated with human connection. And it occurred to me recently that we cannot go out into the new post-pandemic world without taking an account of what we have lost. There is so much to process together, not to compare losses, but to connect over them, to hear the stories of our losses, not to hide them away. Our grief needs to breathe. It needs air. It needs a circle of trust and people who care. Maybe that's the magic circle. My Unitarian Universalist youth group from when I was in high school, we have suffered more than our share of losses before reaching middle age. When my friend Jessica died at age 31, we all gathered to go through her things together. She had been ill for years, so she had a large collection of really cozy pajamas. We all divided them up, and now, on a chilly day like today, I like to curl up on the couch wearing Jessica's pajamas. It feels like she's, hugging me. And if I'm honest, it's something I really look forward to about the autumn and the winter. Jessica's pajamas, when I get that chance to feel close to her like I'm wrapped in one of her warm, wonderful hugs she was so famous for. We need a place to put our losses, a place to write them down or name them out loud in community with witnesses, even those losses we might think are insignificant. The truth is, every loss is big to the person who experiences it. What if we had a ritual before returning to post-pandemic world, a ritual like releasing lanterns into a lake with all of our ambiguous pandemic losses written on those lanterns, and then we read them out loud, we give them the voice that speaks them into healing and release them. These ambiguous losses need a magic circle, like Malcolm's beautiful garden. And as for the loss of our loved ones, those need space to breathe too, to live maybe off to the side in the corner, not like a ghost or a haunt, but like a warm spot in your home or in your life. This is why people keep an ancestor altar in their home or in their heart. This is why people go on a special pilgrimage, a favorite hike, why they wear an old garment, a special piece of jewelry, a favorite mug, a piece of equipment, a tool, a work of art, something to keep that person, that loss, a part of you, to give you a powerful reminder of the heart's duet of wonder and sadness, so you might revel in it and remember the feeling of that love once again. In the very center, under it all, what we have that no one can take away, and all that we've lost, face each other. It is there that I am adrift, feeling punctured by a holiness that exists inside everything. Amen. Blessed be.